My 18th birthday was supposed to mark the moment I finally became visible. Not because of the cake, not because of the gifts, but because 18 meant I was no longer a child who could be dismissed. The living room was decorated in soft colors my mom chose herself. A small cake sat on the counter, candles already placed. My phone buzzed with messages from friends saying they were on their way. Then my brother started yelling. It wasn't just loud, it was consuming. Crying, shouting, accusing everyone of ignoring him. Within minutes, the music was turned off. Decorations were pulled down. My mom walked toward me, her face tense but calm. "We're canceling your birthday," she said. "Your brother can't handle this right now." And just like that, my day vanished. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm 31 years old now, but I still remember that moment as if it happened yesterday. At 18, I didn't protest. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why. I simply nodded, stepped aside, and watched my own milestone quietly disappear. Because deep down, this wasn't new. It was familiar. My brother had always been the fragile one, the child everyone protected. He was emotional, reactive, unpredictable. The family learned to orbit around his moods. I was the opposite: calm, responsible, mature for my age. That phrase followed me my entire childhood. "You understand. You don't need as much attention. You'll be fine." Goad. That afternoon, my brother's tantrum filled the house. My mother rushed to him immediately, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders, whispering reassurance. I stood alone in the hallway, holding my phone, watching guests get canceled one by one. No one came to check on me. I watched my mom scrape the untouched cake into the trash because, as she said, it would only upset him more. I watched the candles bend and break as they fell into the bag. Something inside me folded in on itself. It wasn't about the party. It wasn't even about the birthday. It was the realization that my needs were always optional, that my joy was conditional, that my role in the family was to make things easier for everyone else, even if it meant disappearing. That was the day I learned a painful truth. In my family, I wasn't the child who needed protecting. I was the child who could be sacrificed. And that lesson would follow me far longer than any birthday ever could. I didn't become invisible overnight. I was trained to be that way. Growing up, our house revolved around my brother's emotions. His moods set the temperature of every room. If he was upset, plans changed. If he was overwhelmed, expectations lowered. If he failed, excuses appeared, as if by reflex. "He's sensitive," my mom would say, her voice already prepared to defend him. "He feels things deeply." 18. I felt things deeply too. I just learned early on that there was no reward for showing it. When I was a child, I noticed how quickly praise shifted. If my brother brought home a mediocre grade, it was celebrated as progress. When I brought home straight A's, my mom smiled briefly and said, "That's nice, honey," before reminding me to help set the table. Success was expected from me. Struggle was reserved for him. I became dependable because someone had to be. I learned how to read the room before I learned how to ask for help. I could sense tension in the way doors closed, in the pitch of my mother's voice, in the silence that followed my brother's outbursts. When things felt unstable, I shrank myself automatically. I didn't complain. I didn't demand. I adapted. Adults praised me for it. They called me mature, responsible, the easy one. No one ever stopped to ask what that cost me. At family gatherings, relatives pulled me aside and said things like, "Your mother is so lucky to have you," or, "You're such a good daughter. You don't give her trouble." I smiled every time, because smiling kept the peace. Smiling meant I was doing my job. My brother, on the other hand, was allowed to take up space. When he slammed doors or raised his voice, my mom rushed toward him, concern etched into her face. When I went quiet, no one noticed. Silence, after all, doesn't demand attention. By my teenage years, the roles were firmly set. If my brother forgot his responsibilities, I covered for him. If he lashed out, I was told not to take it personally. If I expressed frustration, I was reminded to be the bigger person. "You're older," my mom would say. "You understand better." What she really meant was, "You're easier to disappoint." I don't believe my mother intended to hurt me. That's what made it more complicated. She loved us both, I'm sure of that. But love expressed unevenly still leaves bruises. Her instinct was always to soothe the loudest pain in the room, and my pain was quiet. By the time I turned 18, I had internalized an unspoken rule. My needs were negotiable. My emotions were flexible. My milestones could wait. So when my birthday was canceled, something inside me recognized the pattern immediately. It wasn't shocking. It was confirmation. I had spent my entire childhood adjusting myself to fit into the cracks left by my brother's chaos. I learned to be smaller so the family could function. I learned that harmony mattered more than fairness. That stability mattered more than me. What I didn't realize back then was how dangerous that lesson was. Because children who learn to disappear don't suddenly learn how to exist when they grow up. They carry that habit into adulthood, into friendships, into relationships, into every space where love is conditional. That birthday wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was simply the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder what would happen if I stopped being the one who always understood. The house didn't explode all at once. It unraveled in pieces. It started with my brother pacing the living room, his movements sharp and restless, like he was looking for something to trip over. He complained about the music being too loud, then about the decorations, then about how everyone was making a big deal out of nothing. Each comment landed heavier than the last, and I could feel the tension tightening like a wire pulled too far. My mom tried to soothe him at first. "It's just a small gathering," she said gently. "You'll be okay." But her eyes kept flicking toward me, as if my happiness was the variable that needed adjusting. My brother's voice rose. He accused everyone of ignoring him. He said it wasn't fair. He said he felt pushed aside in his own home. His words came out messy and emotional, but they carried a familiar power. When he spoke like that, the entire house listened. I stood near the kitchen doorway, watching it all happen, feeling strangely detached, like I'd seen this scene rehearsed 100 times before. The difference was that this time, I was the occasion. When my brother slammed his fist against the wall, my mom flinched. That was the moment everything shifted. Her priorities snapped into place, clear and unquestioned. She turned the music off mid-song. She asked my aunt to take the decorations down. "For now," she whispered to me, "let's just pause things until he calms down." Pause was her favorite word. It sounded temporary, reasonable, but pause always meant erase. I tried to speak. I don't even remember what I was going to say, something small, probably apologetic. But before I could, my brother started crying, loud, heaving sobs that demanded immediate attention. My mom wrapped her arms around him, her back now fully turned to me. "It's too much for him," she said to the room. "We'll do this another time." Another time never came. Guests began texting, confused. My mom took my phone from my hand and typed quick explanations. "Family issue," she wrote. "We'll reschedule." I watched as my plans dissolved, message by message, each buzz of the phone another quiet cancellation. Someone moved the cake out of sight. Someone else started folding chairs. The room transformed from celebration to cleanup in minutes, and no one looked at me while it happened. My brother sat on the couch, breathing hard, his crisis now fully attended to. My mom rubbed his back, murmuring reassurances. "You're okay," she told him. "You didn't do anything wrong." I don't. I wanted to scream that neither had I. Instead, I stood there, feeling my chest tighten as something old and familiar settled in. That sinking realization that my feelings had already been weighed and found inconvenient. That the path of least resistance had been chosen once again, and it ran straight through me. At one point, my mom glanced up and said, "You understand, right?" Her tone wasn't unkind. That almost made it worse. I nodded automatically. That was my role. Understanding was my reflex. It was easier to agree than to force her to choose, because I already knew how that choice would go. I retreated to my bedroom as the house quieted. I sat on the edge of my bed, still dressed, listening to the muffled sounds of normalcy returning. Laughter drifted in from the living room as if nothing had happened. As if my birthday had been a brief inconvenience, now resolved. No one came to check on me. When the door finally opened, it wasn't to apologize. It was my mom, holding a trash bag. Inside it, I saw the cake smashed, candles bent, my name barely visible under smeared frosting. "I didn't want it to go to waste," she said, avoiding my eyes. "It just wasn't the right moment." I nodded again. Of course it wasn't. After she left, I closed the door and sat there in the silence. Not crying, not shaking, just empty. Something inside me had gone very still. That was the moment I stopped waiting for someone to notice me. Because the truth was impossible to ignore now. My brother's emotions were emergencies. Mine were inconveniences. And the longer I stayed in that house, the more invisible I would become. That night, the house felt unfamiliar, like a place I'd lived in for years but never truly belonged to. The walls were quiet, too quiet, as if they were holding their breath. I lay on my bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over, searching for the moment I could have changed. Maybe if I had spoken sooner. Maybe if I had argued. Maybe if I had asked for less. The thoughts came automatically, each one placing the responsibility back onto me. That was my reflex. To find the adjustment I should have made so others wouldn't have to. I realized then how deeply that habit was carved into me. Growing up, I learned that harmony came at a price, and I was expected to pay it. I learned to anticipate disappointment and soften it before it reached anyone else. I learned to make myself smaller so the room could stay calm. Over time, that strategy stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like who I was. But, lying there in the dark, something shifted. I imagined my life 5 years into the future if nothing changed. I saw myself older, quieter, still apologizing for wanting space, still postponing milestones, still telling myself that my turn would come later. I saw birthdays reduced to obligations, achievements turned into inconveniences, relationships built on the same unspoken rule: don't need too much. The image scared me more than the silence outside my door. I sat up and pressed my palms against my knees, grounding myself. For the first time, I asked a question I had avoided my entire life. What if the problem wasn't that I asked for too much, but that I asked the wrong people? The realization landed heavily, painfully, and yet it brought an unexpected sense of clarity. I had spent years believing that if I could just explain myself better, be more patient, be more understanding, things would balance out. But balance never came. The scales were rigged long before I ever stepped onto them. I thought about my brother, how his emotions were treated like alarms that demanded immediate response. I thought about my mother, how quickly she moved to contain his distress, even if it meant dismissing mine. And I thought about myself, standing quietly in the background, waiting for permission to matter. That permission was never going to come. It wasn't because they were cruel. It was because the system worked. My silence kept things running smoothly. My understanding made their choices easier. As long as I absorbed the disappointment, no one else had to feel it. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. My role in the family wasn't accidental. It was necessary for them. And devastating for me. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. I saw someone who had been praised for being strong but never protected. Someone who had learned to confuse endurance with love. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, the words unfamiliar but solid. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. There was no surge of anger or tears, just a quiet certainty settling into place, like a door closing gently but firmly. If I stayed, I would continue to disappear. Slowly, politely, completely. And for the first time in my life, I understood that leaving wasn't abandonment. It was survival. I didn't know where I would go yet. I didn't know how my mother would react or what my brother would say. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done begging to be seen. And once that truth took root, there was no unlearning it. I didn't leave in a rush. That surprised even me. There was no suitcase thrown onto the bed. No frantic packing. No slammed doors. Instead, I moved slowly, deliberately, as if my body already understood what my mind had finally accepted. I opened my closet and reached for a small duffel bag I hadn't used in years. The zipper sounded louder than it should have in the quiet house. I packed only what I needed: a few clothes, my wallet, my phone charger, the essentials. Everything else suddenly felt symbolic objects tied to a version of myself I was no longer willing to be. As I folded each item, memories surfaced uninvited. School mornings where I made my own lunch while my mom soothed my brother. Birthdays where I smiled through disappointment. Apologies I offered for emotions I wasn't allowed to have. I folded those memories away too, one by one, until there was no room left for them. When I finished, the bag felt lighter than expected. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room. This space had witnessed every version of me, the obedient child, the understanding sister, the quiet daughter. It had held my secrets, my hopes, my patience, and yet, it had never protected me. I stood up and carried the bag into the hallway. The living room was dim now. My brother was asleep on the couch, his earlier storm finally exhausted. The television played softly to no one. My mom stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that had never been used for celebration. She looked up when she saw me. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice casual, almost distracted. The question stung, not because she asked, but because of how little urgency it carried. As if my leaving was just another inconvenience to manage. "I'm leaving," I said simply. She frowned. "For the night?" I shook my head. "I don't know when I'll be back." That made her pause. She set the dish down slowly, drying her hands on a towel. "You're overreacting," she said, not unkindly. "Things just got out of hand today." I nodded. "They always do." She sighed, tired in the way only someone who feels perpetually burdened can be. "You know your brother didn't mean—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "That's the problem." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I waited for something, for concern, for hesitation, for a request that acknowledged my importance. It didn't come. Instead, she said, "We'll talk tomorrow. You'll feel differently after some sleep." I reached into my pocket and placed my house key on the counter between us. The soft clink echoed louder than my words ever could. "I don't think I will," I said. Her eyes flicked to the key, confusion briefly crossing her face. "Laura, if my presence causes this much disruption," I continued, my voice steady, "then removing myself seems like the only solution." That got her attention. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I said again, and I did. I walked past her toward the door. My hand rested on the knob for a moment, not in hesitation, but acknowledgement. Leaving wasn't dramatic, it was final. Behind me, she didn't follow. She didn't stop me. The door closed quietly. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, clearer. I took a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. My chest tightened, not with regret, but with something dangerously close to relief. As I stepped away from the house, I understood something with absolute certainty. I hadn't left in anger. I hadn't left to punish anyone. I left because staying meant disappearing. And for the first time in my life, I chose not to. I thought leaving would bring silence. What I didn't expect was noise. The first night I was gone, my phone stayed quiet. No messages, no missed calls. I told myself it was for the best, that space would help everyone calm down. I went to bed on a borrowed couch, staring at the ceiling, my body exhausted but my mind strangely clear. The chaos didn't start until the next morning. My mom called while I was making coffee. I watched the screen light up with her name and let it ring. Not out of spite, out of instinct. Something in me knew that answering too soon would pull me right back into the role I had just stepped out of. When I checked my messages later, there were 3 voicemails. Her voice sounded tight, controlled, the way it did when things weren't going according to plan. By the second day, the calls multiplied. "Your brother didn't sleep," one message said. "He's refusing to eat," another followed. "He keeps asking where you are." That was when the pattern began to crack. Without me there, my brother's emotions no longer had a buffer. There was no one quietly smoothing things over, no one redirecting conversations, no one absorbing the tension so others could avoid it. His anger didn't disappear, it intensified. My mom tried to manage it the way she always had, but this time, it didn't work. The tantrums lasted longer, the accusations grew sharper, and there was no one left to blame but her. She called again, this time more urgently. "I don't know what's gotten into him," she said in a voicemail, frustration slipping through. "He's completely out of control." I listened to that message twice, not because I enjoyed it, but because it confirmed something I had never been allowed to say out loud. I wasn't the problem. I was the pressure release. As days passed, fragments of the truth reached me through relatives. My aunt mentioned raised voices. My cousin hinted that my mom looked exhausted, overwhelmed in a way she never admitted before. The house that once functioned unevenly, unfairly, was no longer holding together. Without my silence, everything was louder. My brother began directing his anger at my mom. He accused her of choosing me over him for even a moment. He demanded explanations she couldn't give. The soothing words that once worked now fell flat. The system had lost its balance. And for the first time, my absence was felt. The realization hit me quietly. One afternoon, as I sat alone in a park, watching people walk by with lives that didn't revolve around emotional emergencies, I understood then that my role in the family had never been about love or fairness. It had been about stability. I had been the invisible support beam, the one no one noticed until it was gone. When my mom finally reached me in person through a long text instead of a call, her tone had shifted. "Can we talk?" she wrote. "Things aren't the same without you." I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. But it was the closest thing to recognition I had ever received. Still, I didn't respond right away. Because I had learned something crucial in my absence. Fixing what broke after I left was not my responsibility. It never should have been. I had spent my life holding the family together by holding myself back. The moment I stepped away, the illusion of balance collapsed, and it revealed the truth beneath it. The piece they missed wasn't me. It was the silence I provided. And I wasn't willing to give that back. The collapse didn't happen in a single moment. It happened in waves. At first, the messages from my mom were careful, almost polite. "Can we talk? Please call me when you have time." I read them without replying, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed to hear my own thoughts without interruption. For the first time, silence felt like protection instead of abandonment. Then the tone changed. She called late at night, early in the morning, during the day. When I didn't answer, the texts grew heavier. "Your brother is struggling. He needs you. This family needs you." Each message carried the same assumption that my role was still waiting for me, untouched, exactly where I had left it. I sat with that realization longer than I expected. I asked myself whether setting boundaries meant being cruel, whether choosing distance made me selfish. Those doubts surfaced quickly, fueled by years of conditioning. But this time, I didn't let them decide for me. I typed a response slowly, deleting and rewriting until the words felt honest. "I love you," I wrote. "But I'm not coming back to fix what I didn't break. I need space." I stared at the screen before sending it, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of finally saying no. The reply came quickly. "You're abandoning us," my mom wrote. "This isn't who you are." That sentence cut deeper than she realized. Because she was right about one thing, this wasn't who I had been. But it was who I was becoming. I didn't respond. Over the next few days, the calls slowed. Not because things improved, but because the reality began to sink in. I wasn't stepping back in. I wasn't absorbing the tension anymore. And without that outlet, the family had to face itself. Relatives stopped urging me to be the bigger person. Some went quiet. Others admitted carefully that they hadn't realized how much I had been holding together. One cousin said, "I never noticed how often you smoothed things over." I didn't take it as validation. I took it as confirmation. The boundary held. And something unexpected happened. I felt steadier. Not happier, not yet, but clearer. My days no longer revolved around managing other people's emotions. I slept through the night. I made plans without checking how they would affect anyone else. I missed my mom. I even missed my brother, in the complicated way you miss someone who hurt you without intending to. But missing them didn't mean returning to the same dynamic. For the first time, I understood that boundaries aren't punishments. They are definitions. They tell people where you end and where they begin. And as painful as the collapse was for them, and for me, it was necessary. Because what fell apart after I left was never stable to begin with. It was just balanced on my silence. I didn't celebrate my 18th birthday the way most people do. I celebrated it years later quietly, intentionally, and on my own terms. There was no party, no crowd, no expectation to smile through discomfort, just a small dinner after work, a single candle on the table, and a moment of stillness I had never allowed myself before. I didn't make a wish. I didn't need to. I was already living the one thing I had wanted back then, the freedom to exist without apologizing. For a long time, I believed leaving my family meant failure. I thought it meant I was selfish, dramatic, or ungrateful. But as the years passed, I realized something painful and liberating at the same time. What I had actually left was not my family, but a role that was slowly erasing me. I had been the quiet one, the understanding one, the one who absorbed tension so others wouldn't have to. And when I stepped away, everything they depended on my silence to hold together began to fall apart. That wasn't my fault. It was the truth finally exposed. My relationship with my mother is different now. There is distance, yes, but there is also honesty. I no longer rush to fix things. I no longer carry emotions that aren't mine. I speak when I have the strength to speak, and I step back when I don't. That balance took time, and it took pain, but it gave me something I had never had before: peace. As for my brother, I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could endure for him. I hope he grows. I hope he learns. But his journey is no longer built on my sacrifice. The hardest lesson in all of this wasn't learning how to leave. It was learning how to stop proving my value through suffering. If you are listening to this and feel something tightening in your chest, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for needing space. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are not wrong for walking away from a place that only loves you when you are quiet. Some families don't collapse because someone leaves. They collapse because the person holding everything together finally stops hurting in silence. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the easy one, the forgotten one, the one expected to understand while no one tried to understand you, I invite you to stay here with me. Subscribe to this channel if you believe stories like this matter. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or whether you've lived something similar. And if this video gave you even a small moment of clarity, please like and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. This channel exists for people who were taught to disappear and are learning, sometimes later in life, how to take up space again. My life is quieter now. Not empty, just honest. I celebrate milestones differently, love more carefully, and choose myself without guilt. That canceled birthday didn't end me, it woke me up. And if you're still here, listening to my story, maybe it's time to ask yourself the same question I finally did. What would your life look like if you stopped shrinking? Thank you for listening.